Here is your complete start sit guide to every wide receiver in every matchup of week 8. Make sure to hit that like button as we get into it to show your support for the channel, and subscribe if you are new to get these rankings every single week to make sure you dominate. But let's go ahead and get started. I do not waste time with the S tier. Ja'Marr Chase, Amon-Ra, AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, and Drake London. If you want more numbers on these guys, go ahead and comment and let me know. They're S tier. We're going to be starting them regardless. So we're going to jump into the A tier, starting with Stefon Diggs and Malik Nabers. Without Nico Collins, Stefon Diggs has been placed and used all over the field, 60% compared to 40% in the outside and in the slot. With Nico Collins, he was primarily a slot guy. So now when you line up outside, you're going to get more opportunities for deep balls and big plays, which is what gives you the fantasy football upside. And with Malik Nabers, I talked about it earlier in some of my other videos this week. With Andrew Thomas being out for the season, it is drastically going to hurt this offensive line. Daniel Jones was sacked 7 times last week. That's not getting any easier in a matchup here against the Steelers and TJ Watt. So Daniel Jones is going to be in for a tough game. If he's not going to have time to let his routes develop downfield, Malik Nabers is just going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage. So be aware of that. Then we're going to have Jayden Reed, T. Higgins, and DJ Moore all tied up next in this tier. Jayden Reed has been pretty up and down despite being the wide receiver 7 on the year. He's dealt with injury. Jordan Love has dealt with injury. But this week he gets the matchup that allows the number 1 most points to quarterbacks and is the easiest matchup for quarterbacks in the Jaguars. And they're allowing the 4th most points to opposing wide receivers. So there's going to be no absence of passing volume here. Next with T. Higgins, he has out-targeted Ja'Marr Chase in the last 4 weeks, now getting a matchup against the Eagles, who are more positive in points allowed to the wide receivers. As long as Higgins continues to get matched up with the number 2 corner on every team, which isn't going to change because you have Ja'Marr Chase on the other side, he's going to be absolutely fine. Like, it's a cheat code as long as Joe Burrow can have that pass volume, which we can expect in this matchup here. Following that with DJ Moore in a great matchup against the Commanders, who probably won't have Jaden Daniels this week. Mariota looked fine, but it was against the Panthers, and everybody's going to look good against the Panthers. If you don't, that's a problem. And Caleb Williams does have something to prove against this Commanders team. Whether Jaden Daniels plays or not, they're going to pour on the offense and make sure they can make a statement. He has a ton of passing volume as well. It is tough because there's 3 capable wide receivers in this offense, but I do expect DJ Moore to have an absolutely fine game this week. But we're going to move that down to the B tier with George Pickens. He is back towards the top of these rankings with Russell Wilson at quarterback. He is number 2 in air yards since Russ has started, and 111 yards and a touchdown last week against a very tough Jets defense. That's not easy to do against Sauce Gardner in that squad. This week he gets a lot easier of a matchup against the Giants, who are easier against the pass than they are against the run. Followed that by Amari Cooper and Jalen Waddle. If we look at last week, Cooper only ran 10 routes, 30% of the snaps, but he had 5 targets on those 12 routes, and he got a red zone target as well. So those are really good splits, by far the most targeted by percentage last week. And when you have Josh Allen at quarterback, the upside is always going to be there. He gets a decent matchup. The Seahawks have some trouble stopping wide receivers, especially considering all of the injuries that they're dealing with. We do just have to be a little bit skeptical because it's not 100% guaranteed that Amari Cooper will come out and play his full 100% of the snaps. It's going to be near there, and as long as he gets above 70%, he's going to be startable. But another guy with a wide range of outcomes here is going to be Jalen Waddle, expecting Tua to play back this week, which is definitely going to up the upside of all of these wide receiver and running back options of this offense. The last time we saw him play with Tua in week 1, he had 5 receptions for 109 yards. Waddle has never really been a target volume guy, but on those 5 receptions, he's going to do absolutely fine with them. And now they get a matchup against the Cardinals, who just let Justin Herbert throw for 349 passing yards. A Chargers team that is last in passing attempts on the year. Then we'll have Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson tied up next tier against the Patriots, who we saw got a good number of targets last week. There will be enough pass volume to go around. It's just a question of, will this matchup stay close enough? Because last time these two teams played, the Jets won 24-3. The good news for Garrett Wilson, yes, he might be the number 2 wide receiver, but you have Davante Adams taking the number 1 coverage and the toughest focus of the defense, so he should be open a little bit. Flowers tied up with Brian Thomas Jr. and Devontae Smith. Flowers, there is a 100% correlation in his game and a pattern that we kind of just have to understand. When the Ravens go up in games and they are dominating by about a touchdown or 2, he's not going to get the ball. It's just unfortunate, but it's a fact. In the 3 games that he's played this year, when the Ravens are up by 2 or more touchdowns, Flowers is averaging 2.5 targets per game and 3 fantasy points on those 2.5 targets. Now he gets a matchup here against the Browns, which probably won't be close, but there is a real chance that they run up this score early, and hopefully he can get enough volume before that happens, because there's no way that this game stays close with Jameis Winston at quarterback and no Amari Cooper. Brian Thomas Jr., on the other hand, gets a matchup against the Packers and Jaire Alexander, which is 100% a red flag. Jaire Alexander is not to be messed with, but the good thing is the Jaguars will most likely be playing from behind, so they'll have no option but to pass. The pass volume is there, But with Brian Thomas only averaging 5 to 6 targets a game, the upside and the opportunities aren't exactly where you want it to be. You'd like to see that number more at like an 8 or 9 because it gives him more room for error. But the 5 to 6 is a little bit worrisome. With Devontae Smith, he's coming off a terrible game last week, 0.8 fantasy points. But with the Nick Sirianni offense and the system that they run, whenever some of their like top guys have a really bad game, they always get them a good amount of involvement the next week, so I kind of expect that to continue here. In this matchup against the Bengals, which should be high scoring and a bunch of offense on both sides, none of their pass defenses are top 10, even top 20, and we don't have Dallas Goedert playing for the Eagles this week. Every time Dallas Goedert misses, it gives Devonta Smith an extra 2-3 targets a game. Statistically, ever since they've both been on this team together, it's just been that way, so it also gives him a little bit of a boost for more trust there. But then we're going to have Marvin Harrison, Tank Dell, JSN. With Marvin Harrison, if you want to move him lower, I can understand it. He does get one of, if not the hardest matchup against the Dolphins defense so far this year. And as of right now, he's really nothing more than a personified Rashid Shaheed 2.0. And by that, I mean he really only runs vertical routes. He doesn't have an insane route tree, and it's more of a coaching issue than it is a him issue, because when 90% of his routes are downfield, you're not going to have a whole bunch of versatility and a high target share. A lot of the receivers, even rookie receivers that are successful, get screens drawn up for them, have short plays, run slants, do something. He only runs deep routes, and yes, he's a top wide receiver in separation on those routes, but if Kyler Murray doesn't have the time to let them develop, you're not really going to get the upside that you're hoping for. So Marvin Harrison is not really going to be high up in these rankings until that changes. With Tank Dell, we have another matchup without Nico Collins, which is going to help him a lot. Yes, he was absolutely terrible last week. It really can't get any worse than what he did, but he did run 100% of the routes. CJ Stroud just had an absolutely terrible game. He only had 86 passing yards. The Packers defense absolutely ate him up. It's not going to be the same in this matchup against the Colts, who allow a ton of big plays this year, and I expect Joe Mixon to also eat, because the way you beat the Colts is just running on them. And that's exactly what Joe Mixon does. So he's a good start as well. But as far as JSN goes, he does get the bump this week because we're likely not going to have DK Metcalf in this matchup. It is a tougher one against the Bills, but with Amari Cooper, Josh Allen on the other side, it should be high scoring and generate a bunch of passing offense. And the last time we saw JSN play without DK was week 7 last year. He saw 63 yards and a touchdown. And dropping it down to the D tier, we're going to be starting with Chris Olave and Darnell Mooney, which might seem a little bit high for him, but I will get into it in a second. Olave is really the true wide receiver 1 with no Rashid Shaheed in this offense, and there is no setbacks. He fully practiced, and he is good to go. The only setback as far as that goes is Spencer Rattler and not being an amazing quarterback, but the good news is he passed for 40 attempts and 35 attempts in his first 2 games. If he's not efficient at all, at least he has the pass volume to give these wide receivers more opportunities and hope that more things stick. So I don't expect that pass volume to go down an insane amount. It probably will be around 30, 35 pass attempts, but it is a tough matchup against the Chargers defense, allowing the 4th least points to opposing wide receivers. On the plus side, they are missing some key pieces on the defense, so that number 4 overall defense isn't really depictive of what can happen this week. With Mooney, he gets the Buccaneers, which is an insanely positive matchup to the wide receivers this year, and we don't even have to speculate that because they played them earlier in the season, where he had 105 yards for 2 touchdowns on 16 targets. Yes, London is the number 1 wide receiver, but again, if Mooney gets to face every single number 2 corner on the team, he's going to have more opportunities to eat, especially when you have Kirk Cousins passing for the volume that he is and having the success that team is. Next up, Terry McLaurin. He's going to take a hit without Jaden Daniels. It's just an unfortunate fact. Luckily, we've seen him play with a million other quarterbacks before, so we kind of know what to expect with these backups. He's going to be okay, but he's not going to get a huge target share. Yes, Mariota looked good against the Panthers. Everybody looks good against the Panthers. This is a tougher matchup against the Bears defense and Jalen Johnson, which do not mess around and are very, very official. So I do have my worries. I think the Commanders are going to stick more run heavy, and it's going to be a more Brian Robinson game. Following that, we're going to have Romeo Doubs. This entire Packers receiving core is just up for a big game every week. It's a question of who gets it and who gets the touchdowns, essentially, because Love is going to pass for 3 of them at least. But now they get a team that allows the 4th most points to opposing wide receivers in the Jaguars. It is a very, very positive one. And you can make the case that the Jaguars run a ton of man coverage. Jaden Reed, statistically this year, has struggled against man coverage. So it could be more of a Romeo Doubs or even Christian Watson. Don't even get me started on that. But there is a chance that those targets go somewhere else. We're going to follow that with Ricky Pearsall / Deebo Samuel, which I'll get into in a second, and Tyler Lockett. Now, to start things off, we know Ayuk's going to be out. That's not really anything to debate. And it looks like Juwan Jennings is going to be doubtful. So he's not going to be in. George Kittle is also questionable with injury. He's probably going to play. But that leaves Ricky Pearsall and or Deebo Samuel, the wide receiver 1 and 2. I don't see how Deebo Samuel plays in this game after all the news that has come out about him being hospitalized last week, but if it happens, that's not a bad thing for Ricky Pearsall. He's just going to help take the number one coverage. And it's not a great matchup against the Cowboys. Purdy has done fine by them. Last year in the regular season, he threw for 250 and 4 touchdowns. And we look at Lockett, again, he moves up these rankings. He's been solid this year, averaging 6.6 targets a game and just under 10 fantasy points. But now without DK in the number one passing volume offense, he should have a little bit of upside here in this Bills matchup. But looking into the E tier, we're going to have Keenan Allen and the new chief in DeAndre Hopkins with Xavier Worthy tied up next to him here. Keenan Allen has been extremely up and down this year. He started the season off with 11 targets in week 1, and then he got injured, followed by 2 decent performances the last 2 weeks against pretty terrible defenses, all things considered. He put up 6.3 against the Panthers and then 21 against the Jags. He was saved by 2 touchdowns. The target volume really wasn't any different. I fully do expect the Bears to try to run up the score on the Commanders this week, and they don't have any capable corners. So if DJ Moore is getting Benjamin St-Juste, that means Keenan Allen is getting Emmanuel Forbes, and that is such an unfair matchup because the Commanders are top 7 in points allowed to the wide receivers and top 10 to quarterbacks as well. With DeAndre Hopkins and Worthy, we don't know exactly what to expect, but we can make a pretty good statistical guess. When we look at Amari Cooper in his first game with the Bills, a younger receiver, he only saw 33% of the snaps. So it's not a very high likelihood that DeAndre Hopkins comes in here on the same week and sees more than 50% of the snaps. But you do have to believe that while he is on the field, he's going to get targeted. Now, that's probably going to be max 4 or 5 targets. Nothing's saying that it won't be an end zone target or a deep downfield target that has a high fantasy point per reception number and expectation. But you do just have to be aware of that. He's not going to be on the field the whole time, so it's kind of going to hinder his upside. With Worthy, he's going to get a boost with DeAndre Hopkins in this offense because he no longer has to face the number one coverage. But nothing is really going to change for him this week. He's going to be a little bit more boom bust, but it's a good thing that DeAndre Hopkins is coming to this team because it opens up the opportunities for this offense. And then we're following that with Jalen McMillan. I do want to tamper our expectations just a little bit. We know that the ball has to go somewhere, but he is a rookie wide receiver that still has to prove himself and prove his trust into this offense. He's had a decent target share, but we do have Trey Palmer. We do have Sterling Shepard, 2 more veteran type of guys that could take a little bit of an uptick in the short term. Jalen McMillan should still be a flex consideration because we have Baker and this offense is very pass heavy, but just be aware in this matchup against the Falcons, it could be a little bit risky. Moving down to the F tier, we're going to have Calvin Ridley, Ladd McConkey, and Christian Kirk. Ridley gets a bump with no DeAndre Hopkins. With Mason Rudolph at quarterback, it is going to elevate this offense just a little bit more. Will Levis is quite literally, statistically, the worst starting quarterback in the entire NFL. And Mason Rudolph had 40 pass attempts last week, so if we can see anything near that, the opportunities are going to be there. Again, if he's not efficient or the passes aren't accurate, it's not as big of a deal as long as the pass volume is really, really high, and you'd expect Calvin Ridley as a very good X-wide receiver to get some targets from that in a matchup here against the Lions, who are allowing some of the most points to wide receivers this year. They're very tough in the run game, but they allow a lot to wide receivers, so this should be a positive spot for him. Following that with Ladd getting the Saints, which is another positive matchup. He is the wide receiver 1 on this team playing out of the slot, which hopefully will garner him more targets, but it is kind of a red flag seeing that Justin Herbert had 350 passing yards last week, and his numbers pretty much stayed the exact same from his season averages. With Christian Kirk, the receiving volume is all the way through the door. Like, it does not exist with Evan Ingram back in this offense. We've known this. It's been a thing ever since they signed him, and the Packers just are a tough matchup for quarterbacks and offenses in general. We're going to follow that with Jerry Jeudy, who does have a transition at quarterback with Jameis Winston. I'm not as worried as people might be because when Jameis Winston did come into the offense last week for the snaps that he played, Jerry Jeudy was the number 1 most targeted wide receiver with him on the field. So there is some upside with that. I don't think you can really get much worse than Deshaun Watson was. And the play style that Jameis Winston has matches pretty good with the matchup they get against the Ravens. They're allowing some of the most points to opposing wide receivers this year. Jameis Winston loves to throw the ball downfield. That's going to match good with Jerry Jeudy. But then we'll have Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson here in this matchup against the Jaguars. Again, there should be a bunch of offense, a bunch of points, and a bunch of yards in general. But they'll just be hoping on a touchdown from Jordan Love to actually uphold that value that you're going to be starting them at if you do decide to do that. Follow that with Xavier Legette. I do want to move him up in these rankings because we're not going to have Deontay Johnson. We still don't have Adam Thielen, which makes him the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver in this matchup here. But speaking of the matchup, it is by far the worst for him because he has to face Patrick Surtain and the Broncos. If you've been around this page for long enough, you know way too much about that matchup, and it is one we 100% want to be avoiding. I'd love to be starting him, but moving it into the G tier, we're going to have these wide receivers all tied up together with Wan'Dale Robinson for the Giants, Jalen Tolbert for the Cowboys, which a lot of people have been putting a little bit of disrespect on his name. He went through a bye week. He had 8.3 fantasy points the week before that, and then had his game-winning touchdown 20-plus point week. So he's kind of been out of the news. The matchup isn't necessarily amazing for him, though. We're going to follow that with Courtland Sutton, Rome Odunze, Keon Coleman, Demario Douglas, Michael Pittman, Khalil Shakir, and Sterling Shepard. If you guys want more numbers and information on these guys, if you are considering starting them, just comment and let me know. I will get to everybody's comments as much as I can before Sunday's tip-off. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one coming very, very soon on Monday for our waiver wire ads.